What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Cosmic Wonder, where we talk all things Marvel and MCU. I'm your host, Warren Thompson, and we just got the first full trailer for Thor Love and Thunder. And it did not disappoint. We got our very first look at Christian Bale as the villain of Thor Love and Thunder, Gorr the God Butcher. And I have to say, he looks pretty dang fantastic. I was a little bit worried at first because we saw some of the toy leaks of him and he didn't look okay, but this looks fantastic on screen. In fact, the whole entire movie looks like it's going to be a blast and include quite a bit in it, including the classic Thor Ragnarok humor, which of course that was directed by Taika Waititi, and this is as well. So I'm expecting kind of the same, but on a bigger scale. So let's break down everything that we saw in this trailer, including an explanation of who Gorr the God Butcher is and why exactly he is out there butchering gods. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future Marvel related videos. Let's get into it. So this trailer opens up with Korg telling a story about Thor to a bunch of people of an alien race. Now this could be the Entidites, like I mentioned in my last trailer breakdown. They're from the comics and they are blue. I don't think they're going to play a major part in this movie, but I do think that Thor and the Guardians are going to be helping them. Now, Korg refers to Thor as a space Viking, which is obviously very appropriate because Thor is from Norse mythology and the Norsemen fighters were Vikings. Now, he's a space Viking because he travels through space, opening the Bifrost with Stormbreaker, which we saw him do in this trailer and the teaser trailer as well, and he learned how to do this in Avengers Infinity War. Now, Korg makes sure to mention that Thor was a god. He was no ordinary man, he was a god. And that's because gods are going to play a huge role in this movie. Obviously, the main villain is Gorr the God Butcher. We also see Zeus, who is supposed to be the god of gods. So the whole theme of gods is very important, not just to Thor, but to this entire story of this movie. Now, from here, we get a look at the entire Guardians of the Galaxy crew. We have Nebula, we have Drax, we have Mantis, Star-Lord, of course, we even see Kraglin here, and we even get a look at Groot, who is still somewhat of an older teen, not so much a full adult, which makes sense because the beginning of this movie, when Thor's with the Guardians, is going to take place right after the events of Avengers Endgame, and in Endgame, Groot was still a teenager. Now, Korg says Thor went on a new journey, and we can see him strike Stormbreaker into the ground and his costume changes. This appears to be where he goes from Ravager Thor, which is who he is when he's with the Guardians, to a new Thor, Thor the God of Thunder, who is going to seek out what is happening to all of the other gods. We have the same scene in this trailer where Korg and Thor are looking at an insanely huge dead beast. And this beast is actually a god, Falagar the Behemoth. And it comes from Thor, God of Thunder number 3 from the comics, which was actually Gorr the God Butcher's debut. And this god was actually a friend of Thor's. And in the MCU, in Thor Love and Thunder, this is how Thor is going to know that Gorr the God Butcher is hunting down gods. Now, at first, he won't know it's Gorr. He'll know that something or someone out there is hunting gods, and he's going to have to figure out who. More on that in a bit. Now from here, Korg says that he got in shape. He went from dad bod to god bod. And we can see him working out, and one of his workouts includes pulling the Milano against its force. It's flying one way, but he is pulling it the other way. And obviously it works because Thor is in the greatest shape we've ever seen in this trailer. Now from here, they show us a scene that we saw in the first teaser trailer where Thor first sees Natalie Portman's Thor. And if you notice, there are a lot of black creatures in the background. Now, we're not actually sure what these are at this point in time because they don't really give us a good look at them. It actually looks like they are intentionally trying not to show us them. However, I think these are minions of Gorr. Gorr the God Butcher has the all-black Necro Sword, which originally belongs to Null, the god of the symbiotes. And while these don't exactly look 100% like symbiotes here, I still think there's something that Gorr the God Butcher conjured using the all-black Necro Sword. So they look kind of symbiotic, and maybe they'll mention symbiotes, but I don't think that there's going to be any Venom connections in this film. And then he sees Mjolnir. He sees it flying through the air, he reaches for it, super happy, but then it turns away because Jane Foster's The Mighty Thor is in control. And the monologue that Korg is going through starts to say that he is the one and only Thor, but then he says he spoke too soon. And this is to make it very, very, very clear, in case you haven't noticed by her wielding Mjolnir and the armor she's wearing, Jane Foster is Thor. She is the Mighty Thor, and she is the Mighty Thor in the comics as well. Now, of course, in Avengers Endgame, we watched Thor break down about not being with Jane Foster anymore. He was obviously going through a hard time, and we actually know that in the beginning of this film, he's going to be trying to find himself, and a part of that is probably going to be getting over Jane Foster. So it might be one of those classic things to where you're just about to get over somebody and then they come right back into your life. And we can tell that just by the way he's talking, saying the old ex-girlfriend, and when she says how long's it been, like 3-4 years, Thor knows the exact amount of time it's been since they last saw each other, kind of proving that he really hasn't moved on yet. But hey, it's called Thor Love and Thunder. And then from here, we meet Gorr the God Butcher, and there's a lot to talk about him, but first, please allow me to thank our sponsors, BetterHelp, for sponsoring today's video. Sometimes life gets pretty hard, and sometimes you just want somebody to talk to. That's where BetterHelp comes in. In this chaotic world that we live in, sometimes it's pretty easy to feel overwhelmed or feel some type of anxiety. Whether it's work, school, family, or relationships, sometimes you just want somebody to talk to. And it's also really good to check up on your mental health. Well, BetterHelp is an online resource that allows you to do just that, connecting with a therapist online from the comfort of your home. They have a broad range of officially licensed therapists, over 20,000 therapists in their network, which makes it very convenient to find a therapist that works for you, and you can change therapists at any time, for free. I know it can be a lot easier to receive therapy from the comfort of your own environment. And it's not just therapy sessions. You can message your therapist at any time, check out some information that may be useful to you, and schedule your appointments all from the same page. Head to betterhelp.com/cosmic to answer a few questions and get paired up with a therapist within 48 hours. You'll also get 10% off your first month by clicking the link in the description down below. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/cosmic. Now from here we meet Gorr the God Butcher, and I believe we actually see him get the all-black necrosword for the first time here in this scene when he's reaching for the sword. And we hear him say the only ones who gods care about is themselves. Then he says, "So this is my vow, all gods will die." Now if you're not too familiar with who Gorr is and why he's the God Butcher and why he's so bitter and wants to kill all the gods, don't worry, I got you covered. Gorr's life was full of tragedy. He was born on a no-name planet where his entire life he was told to worship the gods. His life wasn't always bad. He had a wife and he had a bunch of kids, but sadly, they all started to die. And right before his last son died, he prayed and he begged the gods to help him to save his son, but then his son died. After this, he started to express in his city that he didn't believe that the gods were real. Well, this led to him getting exiled by his people. However, one day while wandering in the desert waiting to die, he ended up seeing two gods fighting and falling down to the ground. One was a purple-skinned god wearing golden armor, and the other was Null, the symbiote god. Gorr, in disbelief that the gods were real, went up to the gods, in which the purple-skinned god begged Gorr for help. However, at that time, Null's sword turned into an amorphous mass and it bonded with Gorr. And he creates the all-black necrosword and then he kills the god. And I think that's the scene that we could be seeing here where Gorr reaches for the sword while it's on the beach. Obviously, the movies don't really follow the comics shot by shot, so I'm assuming they'll switch up things just a tiny bit. So perhaps he picks up the sword and then he kills the god and then he leaves. But this is why he swears vengeance on all other gods. Gorr was at first shocked that the gods did exist, but then he gets pissed because now he knows that the gods are real, but none of them came to his aid. None of them helped, and this is why in the trailer we hear him say, "Gods only care about themselves." And from there on in the comics, after he gets the all-black necrosword and kills the golden armored god, he sets out to kill all the gods. And for the most part, it seems like that story is going to remain pretty similar to the comics. And might I just add, Gorr looks fantastic. They really did an amazing job with Christian Bale. He looks menacing and terrifying. Now from here we see Jane Foster's Thor and our Thor together again along with the rest of the crew, Valkyrie and Korg, on a boat, and Thor puts Stormbreaker down, and he does this so he can summon the Bifrost, and then Tooth Gnasher and Tooth Grinder, his two mystical goats who can fly through space, take them to Olympus. Now in this dialogue that happens between Thor and Jane Foster, there's a little bit of misdirect here. Thor says, "I want to say that was very, very impressive what you did back there," but as he says this, the trailer shows us Jane Foster's Thor fighting people at Olympus. Now this is not what he is referring to. He is not referring to this battle scene. This scene hasn't actually taken place yet, because this is in Olympus and that's where they're going. The impressive part that Thor is referring to is the battle where he originally sees her and Mjolnir, where he reached for Mjolnir but it went to Jane Foster, and we saw those symbiotic type bad guys in the background. Now it looks like Jane Foster's Thor might actually have a little bit of a different set of powers than our Thor. When she's fighting at Olympus, it kind of looks like she uses the hammer to throw ice out. She fires these sort of energy balls out of the hammer, which I do believe are ice balls, because if you listen carefully, it definitely sounds like ice. Now Thor is the god of thunder, so he can use thunder, but perhaps maybe Jane has been able to tap into some other elements as well, which I think would be really cool to see cinematically. Thor would be using a lot of lightning, and I'm assuming Jane Foster is going to as well, but it would be really cool to see her add some other elements in there mixing with the lightning. Now from here, we really see Gorr the God Butcher's power. We see him take his sword, bash it into a planet, and the whole planet gets destroyed. Now this could be a planet, it might also be a moon, but either way, he destroys it, which shows that he has massive power. Now, towards the end of the trailer here, we see Thor, Jane Foster, and Valkyrie in what looks to be kind of another dimension, kind of like a little bit of a negative zone here. Now, I don't actually think that it's the real negative zone from the comics. I actually think it has something to do with where Null came from, the creator of the symbiotes who I mentioned before, who Gorr got the Necrosword from. In the comics, before the Celestials created our universe, Null existed in the Endless Void, and he's also originally from the Primordial Void. So I'm thinking that this is some type of void reality where Gorr can go to, and he can transfer people to as well. This is where I believe they are all fighting, and if I had to assume, I would say that this is a place where Gorr is probably much stronger in his own realm. And I actually think that due to the whole, Sony has the rights to Venom and symbiotes and everything, I think that Marvel Studios is probably going to combine Null and Gorr the God Butcher into one person, kind of like they did with Hela in Thor Ragnarok. Now what's really cool is that Gorr actually says to Thor, "You're not like the other gods that I've killed." I'm assuming we'll meet many gods in this movie, and I'm sure some of them are going to be stuck up and arrogant and not really care about anybody else but themselves, which is why Gorr wants to kill a good majority of the gods. But this shows us that our God of Thunder is different, and our Thor says it's because he has something worth fighting for. And as he says this, we see the little pinkies of Thor and Jane Foster kind of grab onto each other, kind of showing us that they are in love and they are back together, which we love to see. Now, something that's really cool in a blink and you'll miss it moment is the scene where Valkyrie is fighting Gorr. She is actually using a lightning bolt to fight against Gorr, and of course she's going to get this from Zeus. Whether or not she takes it from him or he gives it to her, it's definitely from Zeus. Now, another blink and you'll miss it moment is where we see Jane Foster's Thor hold her hammer up in the air and summon lightning. Now, she is in some sort of a chamber, and if you notice to her left and her right, we can see certain statues, and some of them are very familiar. If you look to the right of her, we can actually see the heads of the Living Tribunal, and we can also see next to it the head of the Watcher. Now, to the left, it looks to be someone who looks like the Grim Reaper. However, the Grim Reaper in Marvel Comics does not have a skull for a face, but Lady Death does have a skull for a face sometimes, and that's who this could be. Now, there are two other statues behind Lady Death, but they're really hard to make out. The one in the far back could be the cosmic entity Infinity. This seems to be some sort of a chamber of very powerful entities, so it would make sense that Infinity would be there because we see the Living Tribunal and the Watcher. And the one in the middle kind of looks like it could be destroyed. Again, we don't get a really clear look at it. But these statues do look like they're made of gold, so this most likely is on Olympus. And I'm guessing that Zeus is going to be able to provide some sort of an insight on other gods to Thor. Now, Thor is over 1,000 years old, so he probably knows a good amount, but not as much as Zeus, because remember, Zeus is supposed to be god of the gods, and I'm sure Thor only knows about Zeus through his father. His father's probably mentioned him at some point in time. But in this final scene here, we see Thor on Olympus, and it doesn't look like it's going too well for him. Zeus seems to have him in chains, but it does look like Zeus doesn't know who he is. We see for the first time Russell Crowe as Zeus, surrounded by his ladies beside him, who I'm assuming worship him because he's the god of gods. But we hear him say, "Let's see who you are. I take off your disguise." And he does a little flick, and with that little flick, he manages to flick off all of Thor's clothes, in which all of the girls beside him and some men next to them all faint looking at Thor's body. But this also shows you just how powerful Zeus is. With the flick of his fingers, he flicks off all of Thor's clothes. Now we see Valkyrie, Korg, and Jane Foster on the side, and they don't appear to be chained up. They look like they're guests. So perhaps Zeus has something against Thor Thor, maybe he had something against Odin. Again, it's unsure because Odin says that he's in disguise, so he probably didn't know it was Thor at the time. However, we do see a scene where Thor is fighting what looks to be some guards with the chains that he was held down with. And then we see the scene with Jane Foster getting into that same platform using Mjolnir to fight some people as well. So I'm assuming it doesn't go well at first, but perhaps Zeus eventually remembers who Thor is and kind of becomes a little bit nicer and shows them a little bit more hospitality. I'm sure a combination of Thor and Jane Foster showing Zeus their powers and also telling him that somebody is going around killing gods might get his attention. And that's it for the full official trailer for Thor Love and Thunder, where we got our first look at Gorr the God Butcher. Be sure to let me know what you think about this trailer and how Gorr looks in the comments down below. And let me know your favorite part. Don't forget to like the video and of course subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the latest Marvel videos. For live updates, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.